Starting a food forest is very exciting, but a lot of people get these things wrong. I spent 3 weeks in Australia learning how top designers solve these problems at different scales: family backyards, community projects, and commercial farms. I'm going to break down the key lessons that I learned at each site and how they're going to change my design practice as I move forward. We'll start off looking at the family scale of backyard systems, starting off with Beth's site.
So it's just a blank paddock, put the swales in.
And there's before photos that we can see what it used to look like.
Yeah. It's had no fertilizers, just pure syntropics, just chop and drop.
This was a pleasure to be shown this site by Toniel and Blake, who are permaculture designers for the area. They toured me around, showed some different projects that they've been involved with over the years. And this project in particular was super interesting because you can really see what it looks like to have swales as the foundation, water management as the foundation of your design. The key thing here is management. Now, at the moment, the system is in a senescent stage where it's ready for some intervention. It's ready for some kind of reset to help the system move forward. And so the big lesson here is that we can all take away is that agroforestry systems are very much on this growth curve. They operate with time going this way, and this exponential growth period happens right here. But as soon as you get to this point where it starts to senesce, it starts to go stagnant, downhill, that's what we're trying to avoid with these interventions. And so regular pruning, regular heavy resets, moving the succession forward is how we do this. So instead of allowing this to drop down, we might actually come in and do an intervention here that will cause another growth curve. It starts to go stagnant down this way, but instead reset, opportunity for another growth curve. And so the key takeaway for this system with Beth is that we need to design systems that match the capacity of the people that are managing them. At this point, this site's going to need some kind of community intervention or training event, so we're looking at potentially going back, doing some kind of hands-on practical management weekend. Actually, this is a great opportunity to mention. We just did a food forestry community event weekend, Sunshine Coast in Australia. It was amazing. Some people flew out from all around the country to come hang out for the weekend, practical management, technical climbing training, and that's what this practice needs. It needs groups of people getting together, developing our practice. We had Kyle the arborist training us on all the technical climbing things. We planted some seed bombs in an existing syntropic system and just had a great time as a community together. We're going to do something here in New Zealand, another one in Australia, and later in the year we're going to be in Europe, but you'll hear details on that. And so the key lesson from Beth's place, we want to design in accordance to somebody's management. I actually just got a photo from a client. They've been away for a couple months and their backyard system is now just an absolute...
We've just come back from being away for 4 months and spent the last half a day just chopping and dropping. Absolutely overgrown, nuts. Couldn't see the house, hardly get up the driveway. So really good to come back to and exciting and quick to deal with. We are really wrapped. It's just such a nice thing. Stops people on the street, they come and have a look. After 3 years, from a sand dune to fruiting, breakfast comes from the garden. It's good. It's real nice.
Let's move to Mike's site. Tropical food forest, epic, more of a permaculture food forest setup. Let's dive in.
The idea was initially just a live stream of myself because I really like tropical fruit and I like organic food. I found it very hard to actually find tropical fruits organically, or even to find some fruits in the first place. The way that I've planted the plants is somehow following syntropic ideas, but you can already see that it's not really classic syntropic here.
Mike's site was really cool for a few reasons. One, his whole system is based on swales. And so the foundation of his food forest is not the fruit trees themselves, but actually on the swale systems that he's implemented. And he's got a really strong emphasis on rare tropical fruit species. Things like durian, jackfruit, trying mangosteen, cacao. And albeit, it's not a syntropic system, and so it's not quite as diverse, especially with the support species, but the whole thing is based on the swale system, right? And so he's got different kinds of fruiting species along his swales, and he does have the occasional support species in there. And so on the gradient between permaculture food forest and syntropic agroforestry, it's a little bit closer to the midway point towards permaculture food forest, but still fantastic. He's really pushing the boundaries for what tropicals can you get away with, once again, in far north tropical Queensland. The key lesson here is twofold. One, you could definitely incorporate more of these support species. You'd create better microclimate, you'd have more organic material to feed to the soil. But these permaculture style food forests can still be really productive without having the full syntropic succession. Because not every site needs a really intensive syntropic approach. A well-designed permaculture food forest can still absolutely thrive with strategic species selection and good management. And here in far north Queensland, the swales are an absolute game changer because they do get a dry season, and when it's wet, you do want to store that water. So that's a major design consideration for most of the food forests that I've been seeing in far north Queensland. For Mike's site, the use of the swale as the foundation for his design and the occasional support species mixed into a more permaculture food forest still is absolutely thriving, doing great. All right, this next site was really cool because it was an actual installation of a family backyard system that does incorporate Syntropic Agroforestry principles. This was with Bunya. He's actually a really well-known expert practitioner in the Byron Bay area.
And when you take on a big chunk like this is like about an acre of food forest planting, at least around the outside. A lot of people aren't really into that intensive management. And when the economics comes down to it, of being able to buy wood chip to spread to start the system rather than grow tropical grasses and cut them every 2 weeks in the growing season to kind of drive a system, which is the most wonderful regenerative process and wonderful for soil ecology. It's just not everyone's cup of tea to how to manage a system. And the reality is I find this both economically more efficient and time more efficient. In a site where there's already machines coming on, moving stuff around, doing earthworks, we utilize them for the process. To me, it's kind of it's a sensible outcome. Everyone's just got to find what works for them. There's no, if you're not doing that, it doesn't mean you're not syntropic or you're not, like merging the use of many different tools. It's appropriate to each situation and its opportunities and constraints, is what it comes down to for me.
And so Bunya has led a lot of that over the last 20 years in the area. And so it was an absolute pleasure to connect with Bunya and tag along with him to some of his projects. And this one in particular was really cool because it was a really well-structured planting design. They had a bunch of really interesting grafted fruit trees. They were spaced regularly, kind of like again, more permaculture food forest, but then they incorporated syntropic principles on top of that. The way they made use of sun traps, windbreaks, and these different microclimates, Mediterranean, temperate, subtropical, and tropical, they really managed the space well. This is for a family client, and so they're not trying to be farmers. They're wanting a nice landscape that's productive, and also not a huge burden to manage. So that's the job of the designer, is figuring out how do we combine all these things and create a design that works for the site conditions and also for the client themselves and where they're at with management capacity, education, all that detail. One of the cool details of the design here is they used thermal mass from this rock wall that they created to basically extend the growing season and keep those tropicals warm through the winter. They had machinery on hand, which is super helpful, drilled the hole, plant the trees, and then in between all those grafted trees and the seedlings, then they would put all the support species. They would put pigeon pea, cassava, taro for the fast producing crops. And it was just really cool to see this hybrid approach, right? The permaculture food forest plus syntropic agroforestry. Cool to see how it can work incredibly well for these backyard scale systems where people aren't wanting to become farmers, but they still want the benefit of the syntropic agroforestry approach. The key here is that you don't need a rigid framework. You can blend strategies. You don't need to go pure syntropic agroforestry. You can incorporate that into a lot of the foundations of a permaculture design. So on the ground, what that looked like was having these different zones where in one area there was the tropicals, maybe some subtropicals, Mediterranean area, and then a temperate area. Each of these areas are kind of mapped to the different conditions of the land. And then in between all those species is where you would go on to plant all your supports that eventually fade away and get cycled back into the system, leaving you with the bones, the foundation of grafted trees that you set out in the first place. Kind of like that. Bit of a mess, but you understand. So this project was a mango orchard, retrofitting portion of it into a food forest. These clients are actually in the online community that we have, the Food Forest Fellowship. They want to turn it more into a homestead, more diverse production, food for them. We essentially reset all these mangoes, right? You can see in the drone footage, we did a huge intervention, reset a whole block of the mangoes, hard pruned them, and then organized that organic material into some new beds. Now, before we did this, there were some tree lines that we ripped with a subsoiler because there's lots of compaction from old equipment, machinery use. The aim here is to create a more diverse, productive system for the landowners, create more of that homestead environment, and just a really cool learning space to delve into the world of agroforestry. And so the foundations of this were reset multiple lines, use the organic material from those mangoes, create new beds, grow a bunch of accumulation species, a bunch of different weedy pioneers, placenta 2 species. We also planted a bunch of things from seed because we went around and collected seeds from the local area. Basically, the system is focusing on soil rehabilitation after years of poisons, sprays, heavy compaction, rebuilding that condition and that environment that's going to favor diverse fruit trees as more of a homestead rather than just purely mango production. And the key lesson here is really that orchards can be transitioned into agroforestry. It just takes a level of order of operations and strategic pruning and resetting to do that well. There's a free food forest community called the Food Forest Family. There's a 3-hour really technical training in there where you can find information about all these processes, all these steps. It's a full technical training from life cycle and succession, full resets, interplanting between existing orchard trees, even of incorporating animals. And so Food Forest Family, if you want to become a member of the paid version, you get access to weekly calls, you get access to in-person events that we run, everything you need if you're on that path of becoming a designer, or if you just want assistance with your own project. If that sounds helpful to you, go check the link out, give me a call. Let's dive into the community projects. And this was at Soul Haven Syntropics, which was actually one of the community events that we did on Sunshine Coast of Australia. Looking at how you're managing support species, what height you're pruning things at, how you're thinning banana clumps, right? I find that the more healthy the system is because I've been aggressive on the banana management.
Yeah. We haven't been as aggressive on the banana management and aggressive with, I suppose, the way that things are being pruned and managed.
The eucalypts that we're talking about, pollarded below the canopy of the banana.
Yeah.
And so they're now having to resprout, and you're kind of seeing that conflict. They're having to shoot back up. And Amadeo did this in Brazil, and he lost a lot of his eucalypts. And so I've not made the same mistake. Now, top the eucalyptus above the banana, because the banana isn't the emergent, the eucalyptus wants to be. So it wants to have that full sun. You're creating that guardian shape with the eucalyptus, right? And you're going to manage those resprouts above all the other canopies.
And now we're putting that seed bank in. We're ensuring the next succession of emergence are going to get up above, but the density is only going to be like 1 every 3 meters or 4 meters.
This is AJ. He's great, by the way. He's been doing a lot of work around here. We've been connected for a while. Big pleasure to be here. Yeah. Whoa. The key insight here is how community work just accelerates the success of a food forest. It was a beautiful site, but it hadn't had the best start, a little bit of neglect, and just less capacity than was anticipated. And so having these community groups come in, do these trainings semi-regularly there, led by AJ, awesome practitioner. The system is seeing more success just because it has more attention, more people spending time there and managing. And so it was a beautiful thing to see. It's a great opportunity for education and hands-on learning and training with other folks in the area. Because that's just as important as the actual design itself, is having the training, having the people there to actually manage. And really the key lesson here is that agroforestry thrives when knowledge is shared and implemented together. That's how we all get better, and that's my point of, sharing these videos with you, is hopefully it inspires you and levels up your agroforestry wherever you're practicing. Hopefully it's doing its job. Here's how it's changed my thinking and my design practice after being here, is that really running events that blend education and this hands-on work, hands-on component, that should really be an essential part of food forest design, because I see so many abandoned systems because they're just left to the one person. And it's a lot of work if you're just a single person setting up these big systems. And so having community come to your site, learning, connecting with each other, the food forest then just becomes a vehicle for that community connection, for that leveling up across the community, builds more community resilience. So these community-driven work days really accelerate your system, but they also create momentum for other projects in your community, and they help move these systems forward that would otherwise go stagnant on their own, being left to just one person. Ooh, this next site, really cool. This was the farm at Byron Bay. It's a commercial farm, but the food forest is managed kind of more at a community scale, and it was such an impressive site to see. This is where Bunya has really had a big influence on syntropic agroforestry, especially in Australia. A lot of people have passed through courses and trainings that he's done there, and it's a phenomenal example of what syntropic agroforestry can become.
I started the process with being invited to integrate some intensive tree lines, perennial systems into an annual system, some widely spaced tree lines and perennial lines in amongst the annual system. And as there was some management changes, we reinterpreted that and started to plant a lot more bigger woody trees. We started to
reinterpret that. Did you catch that? We started to reinterpret that.
This has actually been a year-by-year land tenure that was set up originally for annual market gardeners, with the idea is that you'd get the land in a certain shape, usually with a cover crop that's just been ploughed in and some good weed management, and once you can add some amendments to the soil and till it, you can start to grow some annual crops. And the agreement is, at the end of that year, if you didn't want to continue that lease, that you would return it as you found it. As perennial growers, that we have no intention to return the land to what we found it. We intend to regenerate it in diversity and complexity in time and space. And so we've got a whole different agenda that wasn't set up for.
Now at the moment, it's not at the stage of intense commercial production anymore because it's so diverse. It's in that more mature forest ecosystem where there's more biodiversity and more of a community and education focus. And so they're almost at the stage now where bringing animals into the system could be the natural next step. That would reduce some of the complexity of management even further to bring some pigs or some other large animals into the system and add that as a secondary harvesting layer. And so it was a beautiful example of mature syntropic agroforestry and just a really great lesson in how community food forests function differently than purely commercial ones, which we will take a look at, because they require different management and engagement strategies, especially when you don't own the land or if you're dependent on bringing outside support in to plant and continue managing and harvesting from the systems. So really interesting conversation. The full deep dive on that with Banya is actually online in the fellowship. Maybe eventually it'll get uploaded, but for now it's sitting in the fellowship. The full deep dive, you can go check it out there. So here's one of the biggest learnings from this food forest at the farm in Byron Bay was the transition from market gardens into this diverse productive food forest. And then the natural next step is progressing that into actually what is a lower diversity forest system that incorporates animals. And that's how forests naturally evolve in succession anyways. It's not just in plant succession, but also in your type of management and opportunity for new elements like animals. Reducing the diversity and potentially even they're looking at getting away from the straight lines, like thinning out trees so it's not even straight lines anymore, but it's just this really organic, flowing, natural feeling forest. That's my attempt at drawing market gardens to a forest with animals. The next community food forest project was Namabanda Farm, also led by Banya, and this is an Indigenous-led agroforestry and restoration project.
What we're doing here really is working together with the Widjabul Bundjalung Mob and Bundjalung Tribal Society, who are a group that moved onto this land and started a whole process of farming and a drug and alcohol rehab and a whole bunch of really awesome cultural kind of gatherings that happen here.
The key takeaways here is really this is resetting and retrofitting an old abandoned citrus and lychee orchard into a more diverse food and fiber forest is what they called it, and it's beautiful. It includes bush tucka or bush foods, fiber plants, medicines, honey production, and just extra food products. Really, this is a space for Indigenous knowledge integration to bring cultural practices and people back to the land.
The coastal cypress pine, they burn the bark to create smoke to keep mosquitoes away. Okay, let's get some of those in here, you know. So we just got to kept on bringing together all of the plants as much as we could that we knew people had cultural stories around. So it becomes a space that story can come alive and be engaged with.
It was a beautiful thing to see the cultural reconnection activities, traditional fiber weaving, land stewardship workshops, and just the opportunity to create new ventures. They have a nursery that they're setting up on site to sell fruit trees. And really the lesson here is that agroforestry can be used as a tool for cultural regeneration, not just food production. And so how this site has changed my thinking in design practice is just about more incorporating local knowledge and Indigenous food system practices. It's a huge opportunity and often overlooked in food forestry or in permaculture design. And so at the moment I'm working with a number of marae here in New Zealand, Indigenous communities, and looking at incorporating more and more of these kinds of practices into the systems that we implement. Let's move into the large-scale commercial agroforestry farming setups. Misty Creek is a global reference for animal integration into syntropic agroforestry.
If this was out in the full sun right now, they would just be concentrated in their caravan, and then they would only go out for the first hour of the morning and then the last hour in the evening. That means they're spending more time outside, so they're kind of happier chickens, but also they're foraging more from what they can find around rather than just eating their grain supplement. Yeah, we got to a pretty good point with the chickens, and then also with our management of the agroforestry with Simon, we worked together and really found ways to streamline our management of things so that these agroforestry could provide the benefits to our animals and also to the soil with a real minimum of labour. So, you know, we're now talking like 2 to 3 hours to prune one of these rows once per year. everything's grown well, there's no weeding, every succession's taken care of. It has all of the plants already that I want for my animals, so I guess that's just the benefit of experience and having a clear plan. You don't have to make them, but I don't know, maybe you do have to make them to learn that lesson in here, you know, rather than someone else telling you, oh, don't do this, and then yeah, you need to go through the pain yourself. Trees, some guavas planted every 5 meters because again, yeah, that's just fruit for the chickens. So the idea that we're not going to harvest any of that it'll just get fruit fly or whatever, drop to the ground. Chickens will eat the flies and the fruit. The beautiful visuals of this system, that's what draws people in, and they will buy your product once. But the quality of the product is what creates a lifelong customer that will buy your stuff every week. So us being able to sell our product week in, week out with very loyal customers, to me that says that, yeah, we've got the presentation and the marketing correct, but then the quality of the product.
Incredible stuff. It's a global reference point because it's not common to find other people incorporating animals into a syntropic system, especially at a commercial level. And so to see them making it work is so cool with their cattle, their meat birds, and their eggs in between their syntropic tree line. Really what they're doing is they're prioritizing animal welfare through smart agroforestry design. They actually had east-west tree lines that were wider spaced and allowed for their chicken tractor, multiple of them actually, to be moved throughout the lines. And the key here is that the whole agroforestry system is set up for animals specifically, which is why design and figuring out what is your focus is so important. That was one thing that really impressed on me from the conversations with Tom, is that it focuses everything. And to have that clarity on exactly what your system is focusing on allows you to make easier decisions about the design and the implementation. And so they have these tractors running through their lines with electric poultry netting. So the chickens are on this cycle, they get to go through, shade from the trees, the grass is healthier. In a fruit production system or a horticulture production system, you want north-south lines to increase sunlight, but if you're looking to create shade, east-west lines will create shade faster for the animals. And so that was super interesting insight. And one other thing that Tom mentioned was just the extra wide row spacings. For the cattle, he said 14 meters between tree lines was really optimal. Nice distance, nice width, and having long tree lines, I think he said 120 meters long in some areas. It's less turning around with the animals, less hassling, and so longer tree lines is the preference when working with animals, especially at a larger scale. And so cattle integration is something that I'm still learning about, and Tom was super humble about it as well. He's still on that learning journey, and it was really cool to see how they're incorporating animals into their trees and how they're finding more and more success every year with their implementation of the tree lines. The really high density placenta 2 or pioneer species, support species, in that initial tree line is making a huge difference in how well things establish. As we learn more, we're able to move faster, we're able to do things more effectively in the landscape, and so hopefully we're able to pass some of those lessons onto you here. Full interview with Tom, super valuable. It's all inside the fellowship at the moment. Connect with us on live calls, Q&As, discussions, design support. And so the lesson here with Misty Creek, again, fantastic example, is that agroforestry must be designed around the animal needs when livestock are a key part of the system. After seeing Simon's systems, I was absolutely blown away. Tom said that they were probably some of the best agroforestry systems in Australia. I see why.
I learned in Brazil for a few months, came back here, wanted to make it viable commercially, so on a big enough scale and with good enough efficiency, but still respecting all the ecology of agroforestry. Because I've been trained only really in agroforestry, so it's the only way I really know how to farm. Nearly every eucalypt now has some sort of native emergent coming up underneath it, and I'm happy now that we're getting enough mulch production from the tree rows.
And a lot of this is coming from the pigeon pea.
Pigeon pea's been my favourite that I've been using. It's super productive. It's quite easy to work with.
The key takeaways here from Simon's agroforestry site, where he's doing successional cropping for market farming, he's scaling agroforestry. He's using these principles for commercial vegetable and fruit production at a big scale. All on his own. He's using eucalyptus, pigeon pea, and other fast-growing species for soil building, covering with mulch. He's got rainforest trees planted to be the next level of succession, along with his fruiting crops, the things that he's taking to market, the dragon fruit that he'll be training up the trees. And one of the big takeaways here with Simon's site was just the efficient biomass management. It keeps the labor necessity at a minimum when you have really efficient management. And so he's covering huge areas, he's planting large areas at a time every single year. He keeps expanding. Again, using those early succession pioneers, the pigeon pea, the eucalyptus, to create the right conditions. The banana grass, cutting it with a brush cutter, laying it on the side for the vegetable production, and to mulch the tree lines. And so successional cropping can be done commercially, but it does require precise planning and execution. Obviously, Simon has a lot of experience. He's been to Brazil, he's been doing this for a long time. When you're scaling Syntropic Agroforestry, efficiency is so key, and being able to learn how to do things efficiently is a product of just doing it. So if you're not efficient yet, just start, because you will learn to become efficient as you go, but don't let that hold you back from starting. But start smaller, so you can learn how to be efficient as you scale. The last commercial site that I visited that I want to share here was an absolute inspiration, not for their agroforestry, because what they're doing is a little bit more on the conventional side, but the diversity of tropical fruits at Tropical Fruit World.
And that reconnection, because that's what we're missing. Like you go to the supermarket and you've got, you know, something that tastes like the box it's sitting in, and you're under a fluoro light and air conditioning. It's almost the life of the experience of finding and eating the food that's giving you life is reduced to this monetized transaction. It's cold, it's lifeless. You know, this is not that. We love this. We need this as humans. This is who we are. You know, we might be the most, you know, immaculate and beautiful species on the planet, but our first duty is to look after everything else. Gone out to like a dozen varieties of dragon fruit over the years, but then the ones that when you test them in these experimental gardens, the ones that don't flourish or that aren't productive or they're not tasty, you delete those lines. And then now commercially we do grow the Malay purple and we do grow the pink panther.
A lot of these varieties that we're seeing here, super unique. There was one that you were calling the black pearl avocado, super shiny, turns black skin.
We've never seen it anywhere else. We can't find it on the internet. Like we thought we had the 19 varieties of avocado, and then that turned up. It was like, where does it even come from, man? Types of anonas.
Yeah, 22 types of anonas. That's an impressive collection.
Yeah. And then this guy, the Johnsonii, he was found in a little rainforest patch in Byron, like out the little remnant big scrub patch, and nowhere else in Australia. Nowhere else, man, just here. Come and look, there's a bunch on the tree.
It was incredible. They have a massive diversity of rare tropical species, good genetics, and so it was super interesting. There's a really great genetic conservation of rare and interesting species, kind of as a secondary goal. And so I had a really great conversation with Andrew, one of the folks there who's on the team helping to manage the space. He collects seeds from all around the world to bring them back. Obviously, the diversity of this farm is a strength, but making it economically viable requires more value-added strategies, which is something that I'm super interested in learning more about. I'd love to create my own value-added product line down the road, and just seeing how we can bring more shelf life and accessibility to especially some of these more unique fruits that people aren't used to eating, packaging them well and getting them into people's pantries, into their refrigerators and freezers seems like a great route to go. So the key takeaway from here is that yes, focusing on the rare fruits is super valuable and interesting, but to go that extra step into the value-adding processes just takes it to a next level. So here are the final 3 takeaways from what this trip taught me about agroforestry. Number 1 is that succession must be adaptive, not rigid. Successful projects and farms, they adjust over time. You can prune, you can thin as needed, but sometimes our management capacity changes, and so it needs to be dynamic. And different climates and client types require different agroforestry models. Just because you're enthusiastic doesn't mean you should go set up a farm just like Simon's. Maybe you need to be more on the backyard scale. Permaculture food forest with incorporating syntropic agroforestry principles. Point number 2 is that agroforestry is so much more than just food. It's business, it's ecology, and it's community. Every project needs a clear purpose and management plan to be successful. And if you don't have that clearly articulated, spend some time and sit and think about what are your goals? What is your vision? What are you attempting here? And economic viability is a huge factor, whether it's to make value-added products through education, through commercial production. The financial model does matter, even if it's just to save you money on groceries. And the third key point is that context is king. Context matters, right? Backyard systems need to be manageable for the clients. don't overcomplicate things. Community food forests need engagement. Without people, they fade, just like a lot of community gardens. And commercial systems need efficiency. See you in the next one. YouTube's got you covered on which one should be best for you. If you are interested in working together, joining the community, doing one-on-one consulting work, check the link below. See you in the next one.